libertarianism is pro-immigration, pro-market, pro-trade.
More competitive, less centralized.
Not military confrontations, but peaceful interaction.
The war on drugs has been actually an unmitigated disaster.
So, for those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Brandon McGowan. I'm the Vice President here at Equals for Liberty. Like Brett said, we've got a lot of really cool stuff coming up this semester. But my main deal about this whole club is that we're more educationally based than political. So we go over more so in terms of lectures, historic economic factors that contributed to some of the issues that we deal with today. And so obviously people today think, well, the government is pretty corrupt. That's probably why you're in a libertarian club right now. So my presentation tonight is called Against Authority, Congressional Libertarianism in the 19th and 20th Century. We're going to talk about two really important committees that helped challenge executive power back in 1860 and also during World War II. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. First of all, just a little bit of background going back to the inception of our country. We talk about James Madison. So James Madison believed that congressional oversight is inherently constitutional. He outlined this in the Federalist Number 51, which he published just after the Constitution was ratified. And he notes that it may be a reflection on human nature that such devices as checks and balances should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what's important about this as background information is that this is the precedent that is set for the future presidential administrations and also for future sessions of Congress to go back and look and see just exactly how they relate to each other in terms of everything pretty much from the economy to wartime. So the two committees we're going to be discussing are the Cavote Committee and the Truman Committee. The Cavote Committee's official name was the House Select Committee to Investigate Alleged Corruptions in Government, and it was around for about 3 months in 1860. They published about an 850-page report. It's brutal. I only read through some of it. And then we're going to go and skip ahead about 81 years to the formation of the Truman Committee, which was headed by Senator Harry S. Truman, eventually became President of the United States after Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away. And his committee was formerly known as the Senate Special Committee to investigate the National Defense Program to deal with waste during wartime. It was so effective, as we'll see, that it expanded actually into his presidency when other senators took it over. So my thesis for tonight is going to be that, despite their leanings, John Cavote being a Whig who sided with radical Republicans in 1860, and Harry Truman being a Democrat challenging a Democratic administration, they both employed libertarian principles and challenged corruption and executive power as well. And of course, as a corollary to that, libertarianism, therefore, is a central concept in governance. So starting off with the Cavote Committee, this picture actually comes from Abraham Lincoln's inauguration in 1861. And at the time, we had the 36th United States Congress in session. To give you guys a little bit of a background on that, our current Congress is the 116th. So this is a pretty long time ago. And the main issues, I would say the two main issues that the 36th Congress dealt with were John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which related a lot to the issue of slavery, and then as well Abraham Lincoln's election and ascendance to the presidency, which culminated in his inauguration, which was also seen as the flashpoint for the Civil War. So just to give a little bit of background on John Cavote and the president at the time, James Buchanan. John Cavote, as I said before, was a member of the Whig Party. He sided with radical Republicans in terms of the fact that he was an abolitionist. He was staunchly against slavery. And he actually, after the Cavote Committee investigates James Buchanan's presidency for corruption, he actually goes on to join a committee during the Civil War, which investigates Abraham Lincoln and how his appointment of generals is affecting the course of the war for the Union. And then James Buchanan, of course, was the 15th president at the time, so he was president from 1857 to 1861. And as we'll see, a lot of forces came against him. He was actually a Democratic president, and we'll see how through the course of the Cavote Committee's investigation, he becomes more opposed to the sentiments of Congress and the committee as a whole. So the goals of the Cavote Committee were to, and this comes directly from their language, conduct an investigation of President Buchanan's administration. They wanted to see if they could get him impeached. They wanted to expose him for corruption and anyone who dealt with him in terms of abuse of executive power. Buchanan actually ends up calling this a secret inquisition, a one-sided smear campaign. You can see how this ties into the present and how our current president also talks about Congress. And then, so this language at the bottom comes directly from the committee's report. So they had 5 members appointed by the Speaker of the House to investigate whether President Buchanan or any other officer of the government, usually in his party, the Democratic Party, has by money, patronage, or other improper means sought to influence the action of Congress. And so this is evidence that I highlighted directly out of about only the first 54 or so pages of this 850-page report. And we can see here that over $70,000 was distributed by somebody in cahoots with James Buchanan as the treasurer of the Democratic Committee of Pennsylvania to carry the state for Buchanan. This is huge. They're basically alleging this committee that Buchanan wanted to buy out states to get him elected in 1856. This is something that a lot of Democrats can't refute. To put it into perspective, $70,000 at that time is about $2 million today. And then also, even to add on to the corruption, this guy, George Flett, he was repaid through infamous live oak contracts and through other means that subverted the authority of the government. And then also, a little bit later on, they talk about the charge of corrupt means by the Buchanan Administration to effect the passage of what is known as the Lecompton Bill. Some call it the Lecompton Constitution. And this ties into a historical event that took place before the Civil War known as Bleeding Kansas. And so for those of you who aren't as familiar, Bleeding Kansas was a series of proxy wars, essentially, between people who were against slavery, the abolitionists, and people who were pro-slavery. And the Lecompton Bill was one of 3 or 4, I think, constitutions that were being tried to get passed by different forces in the territory of Kansas, which eventually became a free state. But what the vote committee alleges here is that the Lecompton Bill was being passed by through corruption of the Buchanan administration. The Lecompton Bill basically said, we're going to have a vote of everybody who's pro or anti-slavery, but the people who are against slavery are actually not going to have a vote. So therefore, it would have made Kansas territory slave territory and eventually a slave state. So the committee acknowledges this after it's all gone. But they talk about how Buchanan was pro-slavery and how he wanted to influence that as the United States advanced westward. So the influence that this has is huge. So Democratic members of Congress who are part of Buchanan's camp say, well, the evidence was scarce, but we can't really refute it. And again, this is an 850-page document. They talk against their own party and against the leader of their party, which is the President of the United States. So as a result, Buchanan's reputation is tarnished, and the Republicans who were going against him, and this comes up sort of the Abraham Lincoln, but most of it is done through the supporters of different candidates of the Republican Party in 1860. They distribute the entire report and basically say, this guy's corrupt. This is kind of reminiscent of what happened with John Adams when he was running against Thomas Jefferson in 1800. If you haven't looked into that election, I would. It's a real good case of corruption in the federal government. But however, the Democrats who kind of still support Buchanan are saying, well, there is scarce evidence. They say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to impeach him because there's not enough evidence. However, Buchanan later says that this report sets a dangerous precedent, and they're going to undermine my executive authority. This is huge for the time as well. But moving on, we're going to go about 81 years later, and we're going to see how influence of the legislature proved really effective, especially against the executive branch. So moving on, here's this man sitting right there with that smile on his face. His name is Harry S. Truman, and the only slur that anybody running against him can come up with is the man from Pendergast. Harry S. Truman, he served in World War I. He was the captain of a field artillery regiment, and when he got into politics, he actually became a judge in the state of Missouri, coincidentally right next to Kansas. And so, as the man from Pendergast, this guy Tom Pendergast, a corrupt Democrat trying to get anybody in his party elected, influences some of the local politics in Missouri to get Truman elected. But Truman is seen as an honest man. We'll see how his reputation changes, especially as he gets involved in his congressional committee. Overall, though, this is the only sort they can come up with against him because he was sort of the product of a corrupt political system, but not necessarily a part of the insider group in that political system. So what I'm going to get into now is the subject that the Truman Committee was really trying to fight against, which was waste in the federal government during World War II. And so here I have an excerpt from a famous speech of FDR's from 1940, which is around the time that Lend-Lease was happening. We were giving arms to the British, we were giving arms to our allies, without fighting the Germans and the Japanese explicitly. And so we're going to hear FDR talk about